Victor feels like he has big dreams, but he doesn't have the energy to make them happen. He used to think, "I'll do this tomorrow." But tomorrow never comes. He always wanted to do great things, but it felt so hard to even start. He thinks about writing a book, getting in shape, or learning something new. But instead, he spends his time scrolling on his phone or watching TV. He doesn't even need to pick up the remote because the next episode plays automatically in a few seconds. Why does this happen? He wondered. Am I lazy? The task seemed too big for me. Something feels too difficult in my head. What if I try to do something easier? I need to change my habits, or this cycle will never end. Victor was a man torn between the dreams of his youth and the reality of a life he never imagined living. He worked in a boring office, his creativity stifled by the monotony of daily life. But deep down, he knew something inside him still burned, waiting to be freed. Every day when he woke up, it felt like he was pushing his dreams further away, telling himself that tomorrow would be the day he started pursuing his goals. But, as always, tomorrow never came. What Victor didn't know was that something was about to change. He would encounter the unexpected, an opportunity that seemed to come out of nowhere, but at the same time, had been there all along. It all began with a message. "Victor, I need your help. Come to the warehouse on 27th Street. There's something you need to know." It was from Daniel, a childhood friend he hadn't seen in years. Something about the tone of the message seemed urgent, but what he didn't know was that this night would change his life forever. The rain was pouring heavily that night, creating a melancholic soundtrack as Victor drove toward the warehouse. The city seemed darker than ever, the empty streets reflecting the streetlights, and every corner seemed to hide something unknown. When he arrived, the warehouse was exactly as he imagined, an old building with creaky doors and broken windows. The smell of mold and rotting wood filled his nostrils, making the atmosphere even more oppressive. He entered hesitantly, feeling the weight of the silence surrounding him. Deep down, he knew this visit wasn't just to see a friend. It was something much bigger, something he couldn't understand. The weak light of a hanging lamp partially illuminated the space, and on a worn wooden table, Victor saw a photograph. It was a picture of the place he had always wanted to photograph. The perfect setting for his career. But how did he know this place existed? It was so real, so vivid. He looked around, trying to make sense of what was happening, until he felt someone's presence behind him. It was Daniel. "You came, finally." Daniel was pale, almost unrecognizable. His eyes were wide and there was a deep fear in his voice. "You need to take the photo, Victor. Your life depends on it." Victor felt a chill run down his spine. He wanted to ask what was happening, but he didn't have time. Daniel, with a swift movement, handed him the camera. "Take the photo, Victor. Only then can you escape. Only then can you change everything." The request was strange, and the pressure on him increased with every passing second. The fear and anxiety mixed with the desire to understand what was going on. With the camera in hand, he approached the table and positioned the lens, feeling the tension in the air. When he pressed the button, the sound of the camera's click was deafening. But when he looked at the screen, he saw something that made him shiver. The photo was perfect, but also, it was as if it was more than he had imagined. The scene seemed mutable, as if the photo was capturing not only the space, but also something supernatural. But when he looked back at Daniel, his friend had disappeared. There was no sign of him. Nothing. The emptiness took over Victor, and he felt the pressure of something greater than him approaching. The darkness of that warehouse seemed to engulf everything around him. Victor spent days trying to understand what had happened. Daniel's disappearance and the strange photo haunted him. He couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change in a drastic way. He couldn't wait anymore. Procrastination could no longer be an option. He needed to act. It was then that he made a radical decision. He would start taking photos every day. It didn't matter if the scene was simple or if he didn't have the perfect technique. He needed to start. In the first days, he faced difficulties. His clicks were lifeless, soulless, but he persisted. going out every day, seeking the best angle, capturing images of a world that seemed more vivid than ever. His co-workers began to notice the changes in him. He was lighter, more determined, but no one knew what he was going through internally. A month later, Victor was invited to a photography exhibition. His work, something he never imagined could be possible, was finally being recognized. When he arrived at the venue, the heat in the room seemed to press against his soul. The walls were covered with his photos, and people walked by admiring the images. But one photo in particular caught everyone's attention. It was the photo of the foggy scene he had captured in the warehouse, but now it was even more alive. Something about the image made people feel uneasy, as if the photo had the power to transport them to that place. And deep down, Victor knew that this image was connected to something more, something he still didn't fully understand. But as the weeks went by, the feeling that something was wrong grew. He started seeing Daniel in his dreams, always asking for something. "You haven't finished. The photo isn't complete," he would. So the truth came to light when Victor began to feel like he was being followed. He saw shadows that weren't there, heard whispers in the wind. One night, while photographing, he encountered a figure he recognized immediately. Daniel. But he didn't seem human. His eyes were empty, and his skin was pale, almost transparent. "You don't understand, Victor. I brought you here because you have to finish what you started," Daniel said in a distant voice. It was then that Victor realized the photograph wasn't just an image. It was a door. And he had opened that door when he clicked the camera. Victor was now faced with a dilemma. He had been guided by something beyond his comprehension, but he knew the only way to escape this illusion was to complete his journey and finish the photo. He knew the price of not doing so would be high, but at the same time, he felt that by completing the photograph, something else in his life would change forever. At the last second, when Victor was about to take the final photo, a gigantic shadow appeared before him, something he wasn't ready to see, something that could change his life or destroy it forever. What would he do? Victor stopped in the middle of the street, his camera still in his hands, his heart pounding. The shadow before him was immense, like an evil presence that stretched across the entire scene. He didn't know what that figure represented, but something in his instinct told him that if he didn't act fast, something irreversible would happen. The shadow moved slowly toward him, but unlike a human being, it made no sound. It was as if it was absorbing the very light around it, distorting reality, making the environment darker, more oppressive. Victor looked at the photo in his camera, which had once seemed to be a portal to the unknown. Now, it seemed like a nightmare, distorting itself with every passing second. He didn't know what was happening, but one thing was clear. He couldn't go back. "What do you want from me?" Victor asked, his voice trembling. But the shadow didn't answer. It just kept approaching, as if it were invading his mind. Victor's eyes began to dilate, and the feeling of panic took over his body. He tried to escape, but his legs were heavy, as if the ground was sucking away his energy. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to concentrate, and then the shadow stopped. It didn't disappear, but stayed there in front of him, watching him with disturbing intensity. Suddenly, Victor felt a tug in his chest. It was as if something was trying to tear him from his own body. The air around him grew denser, and he began to see images flashing before his eyes. The photo, the warehouse, Daniel's figure, and lastly, the presence of the shadow. It was then that the shadow spoke. Its voice was deep, as if coming from somewhere beyond Earth, a cold, dark place. "You did what you had to do, Victor, but you didn't understand the true extent of your choice." The voice reverberated in his mind, making him falter. "The photo isn't just an image, it's a portal, a link between worlds. And now, you are between these two worlds." Victor froze. The shadow seemed to know more about the photograph than he could ever have imagined. He didn't understand what this meant, but something in his mind, a distant memory, began to surface. He remembered a story his father used to tell him when he was a child, about portals to other worlds, about the fine line between the real and the supernatural. "What should I do?" he asked, his voice full of despair. The shadow responded coldly and impersonally. "You must finish what you started. Complete the photo. Only then will you be able to leave this place." Victor knew there was no turning back. He was trapped, not just physically, but emotionally as well. He didn't understand how this was happening, but the feeling of being watched, of being consumed by the shadow, made him believe his life was at stake. He began walking, moved by an invisible force toward the place where the photo had been taken, the warehouse. The scene he had photographed was still imprinted in his mind, and he knew that to complete the cycle, he needed to return there. The journey to the warehouse seemed endless. The path was distorted as if the space was being folded and twisted around him. He could see blurred, distorted images and hear sounds that confused him. It was as if he was in a nightmare, where the line between the real and the unreal had vanished. Finally, he reached the warehouse. The building seemed even darker than before. The walls seemed to move, and the environment was impregnated with a sense of imminent death. The smell of mold was stronger, and the sound of the rain felt heavier, as if it were going straight to his soul. Inside the warehouse, everything was the same as the first time he entered. But the photo was different. Now it wasn't just a static image. It was alive. The scene in the photograph seemed to move, as if it were calling Victor to enter. He didn't know what to do, but he knew he couldn't retreat. Victor looked at his camera, his fingers trembling. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't hesitate anymore. He couldn't postpone it any longer. He would have to complete the photo. He needed to enter the world of the photograph. The shadow appeared again, but this time it didn't speak. It just watched, as if waiting for Victor to make the final decision. Its eyes were fixed on the photograph he held, but as he looked at it, the fear grew. He was no longer just taking a photo. He was about to do something that could change the course of his life, something he didn't know if he was ready to face. With a deep sigh, Victor finally aimed the camera at the photograph. He pressed the button. When the flash illuminated the room, he felt an explosion of energy around him. It was as if time and space had distorted in a single moment. Everything around him began to disappear. The warehouse, the shadow, even himself. Victor felt a sensation of lightness and, at the same time, fear. He was being transported, but to where? He didn't know. What happened to Victor? Where is he now? Did he manage to escape? Or did he become trapped in another world? A world he never imagined existed? The photograph was not just a door. It was the key to something much bigger. And now Victor is at the center of it. But is he ready for what comes next? Victor didn't know how much time had passed since the flash of the camera lit up the room. When his eyes opened, he found himself in a strange place, a landscape unlike anything he had ever seen before. The air was dense, almost thick, and a blanket of mist covered the ground. The light was faint, as if the sun had never risen there. The environment was suspended between the real and the unreal, and the feeling that he was in a dream, or perhaps a nightmare, never left him. He looked around, trying to understand where he was. The scene felt familiar, and at the same time completely new. There were twisted trees, whose roots seemed to intertwine and disappear into the soil. The sound of the wind was muffled, and everything was enveloped in a heavy stillness, as if the world around him was waiting for something. But for what? As he walked, his steps echoed in the mist, but there was no one in sight. The air was cold, and he felt the humidity penetrate his bones. Each breath was a challenge, as if the environment was resisting his presence. It was then that he realized he was not alone. From the depths of the mist, a figure slowly approached. It was Daniel, but now he no longer seemed like the childhood friend Victor had known. His eyes were empty, lifeless, and his skin was pale, as if death had already begun to take hold of him. He was floating, more of a shadow than a real person. "You are where you should never have come, Victor," Daniel said, his voice echoing from all directions. "This is no longer the world you know. This is the place between life and death, the limbo." Victor felt a chill run down his spine. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The sight of Daniel, or rather, what was left of Daniel, left him paralyzed. With every step he took, The feeling of being pulled deeper into that alternate reality grew stronger. "But what am I doing here?" Victor managed to ask, his voice hoarse and trembling. "Why am I here?" Daniel looked at him with an empty expression. "You opened the door." The photo was not just an image, Victor. It was a portal to this place. And now you're trapped between worlds. Victor felt a lump in his throat. "And what do you want from me? What's happening?" Daniel smiled cruelly. "You still don't understand? I was your key to get here. I guided you, pushed you to take that photo. But there's a price, Victor. We all pay a price. The mist around Victor seemed to stir, as if the environment was alive, breathing with him. He felt the weight of Daniel's words crushing him. The idea of being trapped in a place like that terrified him. He tried to step back, but his legs were heavy, as if something was holding him in place. Daniel's figure began to slowly dissipate, as if he were mist too. But before disappearing completely, he said something that made Victor shiver. "You can still go back. But for that, you must make a choice. The photo you took wasn't complete. You must find the last piece of it if you want to escape." Victor, not knowing what to do, continued to walk. He didn't understand what this meant, nor how he could find the missing part of the photo. Everything seemed so confusing, so out of his control. But one thing was clear. He couldn't stay there forever. Thus, mist seemed to guide him, pushing him forward as if the place knew what he needed to do. He began walking, following a never-ending path, feeling the sensation that he was being watched. There was something else in that place, something dark. He didn't know if he wanted to find out what it was, but he knew he had no choice. As he walked, images began to appear in front of him. First, he saw a photo. The photo of his mother smiling at him just like in his childhood. But something was wrong. Her smile was distorted, and her eyes seemed empty. She looked like a stranger. He tried to approach, but the image faded before him, like a shadow that disappears. He kept walking, and more images appeared, each one more disturbing than the last. He saw photos of himself, but with grotesque details, changes he had never made. But that seemed natural in the distorted world he was now in. The photograph wasn't just a portal, it was a representation of the choices he had made, the things he had failed to do, the opportunities lost. Victor didn't know how much time had passed anymore. Limbo seemed endless, and with each step he took, he moved further away from his reality. But deep in his mind, he knew what he had to do. He had been postponing his choices for so long, but now he couldn't escape his destiny any longer. He remembered the photo, the first time he saw it. It wasn't just an image, it represented all his choices. And to escape that place, he would have to finish what he started. He would have to find the last part of the photo and complete it. The mist slowly dissipated, and before him appeared the final piece of the puzzle. It was an old photograph from his childhood, a moment he had forgotten. The photo showed him, still a child, holding a camera, smiling next to his mother. But deep down, something was wrong. He couldn't understand what was missing. That's when he realized the last piece of the photo was himself, or rather, what he could be. He needed to find the courage he had lost over the years. He needed to stop procrastinating. The emptiness in the photo represented all his failures, all the opportunities he had let slip away. With a deep sigh, Victor pressed the camera again, ready to capture the last part of the photo. But before the flash went off, he heard a voice, one final voice from the limbo saying, "Are you ready to face the price of your choice?" Victor felt the weight of the choice in his hands. He was facing the last part of the photo, the final piece. That could give him his freedom. But at the same time, he knew there was something much deeper at stake. He was in a place beyond comprehension, a limbo that seemed to be both a physical and emotional prison. The photograph he held now was distorted. He saw his reflection in the image, but the reflection was not the Victor he knew. The man in the photo was empty, like a shadow of himself, without purpose, without direction. And he knew that image represented the man he could be if he didn't make a decision now. He felt the weight of regret, procrastination and fear that had paralyzed him for so long. He couldn't hide anymore. He had to act. But what was needed to complete this photo? He looked once again at the reflection and felt a pain in his chest. It was the pain of a dream unfulfilled, the pain of a life unlived. "You know what you need to do, Victor," said a familiar voice, echoing in his mind. It was Daniel's voice, but this time there was no more distorted shadow. He was there, clearer than ever, but still a reflection of what he would become if he made the wrong choice. "It's not too late, Victor. But if you complete the photo, you won't be the same. The price will be high. You will lose something." Victor looked at the image in his hands, feeling the weight of his words. He didn't know what he would lose, but one thing was clear. If he wanted to escape that limbo, he would have to face his greatest fear, the loss of himself. With a deep sigh, he pressed the camera's button. The flash lit up the room once more, and at the same time he felt an explosion inside of him. The world around him began to disintegrate, the mist dissolved, and the landscape changed, transforming into something completely new. When Victor opened his eyes, he was no longer in limbo. He was back in reality, but something was different. The environment around him was the same, but he felt a sense of distance, as if he had been transported to another version of himself. He looked at the camera in his hands and saw the last photo he had taken, but the image was distorted, with shadows that didn't belong to that place, as if the real world had been altered. He knew the photograph was more than just a moment captured. It was the key to his transformation. But what did this distortion mean? Victor tried to move, but felt a pressure on his shoulders, as if something was holding him back. He looked around and noticed that the people in his life were silent, as if he were invisible to them. His friends, his family, they all seemed distant, as if they didn't recognize him. "What happened?" he murmured to himself, but no one answered. The weight of his choices was clearer than ever. He was no longer in the same world as before. Something had changed, and he still didn't know exactly what. Victor wandered through the city, trying to understand what had happened. He passed by familiar places, but nothing seemed real. The colors were faded, and the sounds around him were muffled, as if he were in some kind of invisible mist. The world was silent, as if everyone around him was disconnected. He arrived at his parents' house, but upon entering, he realized the door was locked. He knocked several times, but no one answered. A sense of anguish took hold of him. He knew something was wrong, but he couldn't understand what. It was then that he remembered the photo, the last part of the image he had taken, the distortion. He felt in reality was directly related to the photograph. He needed to understand what that distortion meant in order to find a way to restore the balance. But as he looked at the photo, he began to realize that the distortion wasn't just something visual. It was emotional. The photo wasn't just physically altered. It represented something he had lost in his life, the connection with the people who mattered most to him. Victor's journey was far from over. He still had much to learn about the choices he had made and what the photograph truly represented. He began to understand that the photo wasn't just a portal to another world, but a representation of the connections he had or had lost throughout his life. Each distortion in the photo represented a loss. The loss of his true identity, the loss of his passion, the loss of the people he loved. He was trapped in a cycle of procrastination and regret, and now, the only way out of that cycle was to reclaim what he had left behind. Victor knew that what he had to do was confront these losses, accept the choices he had made, and finally forgive himself. He needed to rebuild the bridges he had burned and reconnect with the world around him. But before he could act, a new figure appeared before him, darker than the previous ones. It was a hooded figure, with bright eyes that seemed to reflect all his fears. The figure pointed at him and said, "You think you can turn back, Victor? The choices you made can't be undone. The price you paid will be the only truth that remains." Victor felt an overwhelming weight on his chest, as if all his failures and regrets were taking form in the figure before him. He had lost himself for so long, putting things off, fearing the future. But now, in that moment, he knew that the real battle wasn't between good and evil, but within himself. "I can't go back, I know that," Victor said, his voice tense, yet determined. But I can move forward. I can do something different now. The figure stood silent for a moment as if evaluating his words. Then, without saying a word, it disappeared. The silence that followed was deafening. And, for the first time, Victor felt a sense of freedom. When the figure disappeared, Victor found himself once again facing the photo. It was no longer distorted, but clear, as if it had restored itself to its original form. He looked at it and, for the first time, saw something he hadn't noticed before. The photo was not just about others. It was about him. He saw his own reflection with a genuine smile, and the eyes that had once been empty were now filled with hope. What he understood in that moment was that the price of choice was not the loss of something, but the fear of taking action. He had always hidden from what he could be, always postponing what he knew he needed to do. But now, with the power of his choice, he reconnected with his true essence. Victor knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was finally ready to face the future. He couldn't erase the past, but he could build a new future. A future where his choices would be made with courage and determination. With one last look at the photo, Victor pressed the camera's shutter, and in that instant, as the flash went off, he felt as though he was being pulled back to reality. The world around him stabilized, the colors intensified, and the sounds became clearer. The pressure on his shoulders eased, and when he looked around, he saw that he was back in the city he knew. But something was different. He was back, but now with a new perspective. He looked at the people around him and felt that the connections that had once seemed distant were somehow closer. He knew he couldn't correct all the mistakes, but he knew that, from that moment on, he had the power to rebuild what had been lost. He went back to his house, and upon entering, found his camera on the table. He had used that object to capture what he truly desired in life, the connection with his true essence, with the people who mattered, and, most importantly, with his own dreams. He smiled, finally understanding that the true secret was in starting. In the following days, Victor made a choice with every step. He no longer felt paralyzed by the fear of failure. He knew that the mistake wasn't in trying and failing, but in never truly trying. He went to the office and quit, a gesture that in the past would have been unthinkable. He knew he had to follow his passion for photography, do what he loved, and not what the world expected of him. With his camera in hand, he began capturing everyday moments in a unique way, exploring the details that others didn't see. He started working as a freelance photographer, and over time, his images gained recognition. But the most important thing was what he learned about himself. He didn't need to be perfect. He just needed to be true. The photo he took, the last image, didn't represent a lost place, but a place found within himself. Victor, now calmer and more self-assured, returned to the old warehouse where everything began. The mist was still there, but now it didn't hold the same weight. He looked around, and instead of seeing a prison, he saw a place of transformation. He took one last photo, not of a distorted scene, but of the light entering through the broken windows, gently illuminating the dark space. He knew that now, he had learned the most important lesson. Choices don't define us by what we leave behind, but by what we do with what we have now. And with that, he smiled, knowing that his journey had just begun. No longer a slave to fear, but the captain of his own life.